I recently made a video about mobility in Battlefield 6, and in that video I claimed that mobility only affects your movement speed while aiming down sights. I got a few comments asking to analyze whether or not mobility affects a few other things, so today we're going to test one of those things. A lot of people think that mobility increases your weapon draw speed, allowing you to transition from sprinting to firing faster and reducing the time it takes to switch weapons. So today we're going to test that, and the results from this one are pretty interesting, so be sure to stay until the end. Let's start off by explaining how we're going to test this. So I'm here in Siege of Cairo, and all I'm going to do is sprint down this road, firing a single shot periodically. The sprint to fire animation is a little funky in Battlefield 6 because if you're not in a full sprint, you'll get a very short time before you fire like this, where if you run and then spam it, you can see sometimes you get long animations, sometimes you get pretty short ones. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to make sure that we reach a full sprint in between shots before we fire another one. This is going to allow us to get consistent measurements every time we test. So that's our methodology for how we're going to test our sprint to fire time. And we also have to have a hypothesis here. You know, what are we looking for here? So our hypothesis is that if mobility affects sprint to fire time, then we should see a clear trend in the behavior where low mobility weapons consistently display higher sprint to fire times than high mobility weapons do. The other thing we're going to check is weapon swap times, and the test for that one is pretty simple. All we have to do is stand still, and I'll switch to my secondary weapon, and then I'll switch back to my primary weapon, and I'll do that a few times to get a few measurements. That way I can kind of remove any measurement uncertainty. With those, we'll be able to look at the weapon swap from and the weapon swap to speeds. Let's go ahead and start with the sprint to fire test. So first we'll take the high mobility gun. So in this case I'm going to take the SGX here with a mobility of 72, and we'll do our sprint test. So we'll go ahead and spawn in with this weapon. We'll come to the end of the road, and then we're going to sprint forward, reaching a full sprint and firing periodically. It's a little bit hard to measure these accurately because the animations are quite fast and I'm only recording at 60 FPS, but in general there we got about 7 to 8 frames as our sprint to fire time, which is about 120 milliseconds or so. So now we're going to go ahead and switch to a low mobility weapon. So in this case we have the L110 with a mobility of 28, and we're going to repeat our exact same test. So we'll go to the end of the road here and we'll sprint and occasionally fire. And this one, as I'm doing the test, already feels noticeably a little bit slower. And with the measurement there we get about 18 frames sprint to fire time, or about 300 milliseconds, so more than twice as slow as what we got with the high mobility weapon. So, okay, maybe mobility does affect the sprint to fire time, but we would be stupid researchers if we just ended our test there, so I went off camera and I tested a whole bunch of other guns, and this is the data that I got, plotted once again in a beautiful LibreOffice calc plot. Something is off, though. There appears to be some kind of a trend between mobility and sprint to fire time, but there are definitely some outliers here, like this one over here on the left that's all the way at a mobility of 32, but a sprint to fire time of only 11 frames. Doesn't really make sense because most of the other weapons in this category are up around 18 or 20 frames. And also, why do so many of these just have the exact same time? I mean, part of this is because I'm only recording at 60 FPS, so the granularity of my measurements is limited to the frame rate of 60 FPS. But there's actually a little bit more going on, and I think that the thing that reveals what's going on is if we plot these instead by the weapon type. Suddenly, if we do that, things become pretty clear. The LMGs are all at roughly the same sprint to fire time with each other, as are the assault rifles and every other weapon type in the game. So the real takeaway here is not that mobility changes your sprint to fire time, but the weapon type is actually what determines your sprint to fire time. It's more so just a coincidence that weapons with high mobility also tend to have fast sprint to fire times, and vice versa. That's not the end of the investigation, though. There are still a few things to look at. For one, the assault class assault rifle proficiency supposedly reduces your draw time and allows you to fire sooner out of a sprint, so let's go ahead and test that. I'm first going to test here just by taking the M433 on the recon class to serve as our baseline. With the recon class, I got about 13 frames sprint to fire time. Now we're going to go ahead and switch over to the assault class, and we're going to repeat that same test. So we'll go to the start of the bus here, and we'll repeat our sprint to fire test. And it doesn't really feel much different. And with our measurement, we get about 11 frames sprint to fire time there. It's not a big difference. With my measurement at 60 FPS, 2 frames is about 33 milliseconds of actual time. Keep in mind that the time in between shots with the M433 at full auto is about 72 milliseconds, so this extra speed won't even get you an extra shot off. I was also very curious about the angle grips because there's 3 angle grips in the game and they don't really say if one increases the draw speed more than the other one. I mean, this one says improves weapon draw speed, this one says increases weapon draw speed, and then the full angled is back to improves weapon draw speed. So does that mean something different? Is it the same thing? So once again, I went and tested this as well. We see a very similar result with the angled grips as we did with the assault class proficiency, and that's that we get about 11 frames sprint to fire time with all of these grips, so the same 2-frame reduction that we saw as before. There also wasn't any difference between each of these 3 grips, at least not that I was able to notice. It's kind of interesting to me that there isn't really any bigger reduction for the more expensive angled grips. It's also a bit of a disappointing result because the improved draw speed that you get from the angled grips and from the assault class proficiency are both pretty minimal, and they don't really affect too much. I mean, 33 milliseconds is almost imperceivable. If you're a very seasoned gamer, you can probably detect it, but for a lot of people, I feel like you're not even going to notice. I unfortunately don't have the angled grip unlocked on any of the LMGs, so I can't test to see if it makes a bigger difference on those weapons at this time. That might be something that I have to test again in the future. It's an interesting takeaway as well, though. I think this actually changes my thoughts about the full angled grip quite a lot. I previously thought that the improved draw speed was worth the ADS accuracy while moving costs that you get by equipping that grip, but now that I know that the draw speed bonus is small and it's the same across the 3 angled grips, I really think that the slim angled with no penalty is probably the best of the 3. Then again, who knows if the accuracy while moving penalty is actually meaningful at all either. I guess I'll have to test that in the future. I was originally planning on showing the weapon swap investigation in detail, but honestly the results are not that interesting, so I'll just give the takeaways. Weapon swap time, like sprint to fire time, does not appear to be linked to mobility, but rather to the weapons themselves and the weapon classes. I say specifically the weapons in this case because among the LMGs, the DSR did have a lower swap to time than the big clunky LMGs like the M110. Unlike sprint to fire time, the weapon swap speed did not seem to change at all with either the assault class proficiency or the angled grip, so if you thought that you would be improving your weapon swap time, think again, unfortunately. So that's my investigation for today. I think we once again learned some interesting things. Sprint to fire time and weapon swap time are not directly linked to the mobility stat, but rather are linked to each individual weapon, with the weapons in each category sharing similar features. Weapon swap time doesn't appear to be affected by anything, and sprint to fire time is minorly affected by the angled grips and the assault class proficiency. Let me know what you think of these findings in the comment section below, and be sure to subscribe if you found this video interesting. Also, let me know what else you'd like me to investigate. I've already got a long list of potential things to look at, but I'll gladly take more. Thank you everyone for watching, and goodbye.